I lost my pencil in prison. Granted, it was my first day and I was so scared. I'd never been to a prison before. I'd never thought about going to prison. Suffice it to say, prison was not on my radar. Yet, there I was in prison and with no pencil. Richard J. Donovan State Prison, a men's high security correctional facility. I was a new employee of Project Paint, a nonprofit which brings art to prisoners. After passing a background check, my first task was to attend our 4 hours of paid prison training. On a sunny Saturday morning, instead of heading to the tennis courts of La Jolla, I drove south to the border, then banged a sharp left and drove to the middle of nowhere. When I first spotted the facility, it looked like an oasis on the horizon. The mountains glowed in the background. It was pretty. But I'm going to cut to the chase. Prison training was a huge disappointment. Of the 50 people who slowly filtered in the room, 45 of them were men, those of whom were carrying Bibles. I'm going to be generous when I say that the training lasted for an hour and a half if you include the welcome donut break. And what did I learn? What were the skills and knowledge that I acquired? There was one lesson, one message that was repeated over and over again. Do not have sex with the prisoners. Every time this was repeated, I couldn't help myself. My head would whip around, scanning the room to see if this was some sort of inside prison joke. And then looking around to see who was as shocked as I was. No one reacted. Apparently, this is a problem. And then I started wondering which Bible-carrying person was having sex with a prisoner. A few days later, I was back to teach my first weekly drawing class. As I approached the area this time around, there was no glowing aura or oasis. My working partner and I went through 3 checkpoints, a large, dark, empty space of land, and huge gates until we arrived at a yard where the guards were waiting for us to let us into the gym where the class was to be held. Throughout this rather unnerving journey of getting into the inside of a high-security men's state prison, I kept looking around, wondering where the Bible-carrying people were having sex. Most prisons are numbered 1 to 4, 1 being the lowest level of security, 4 being the highest. I was on a level 3. On my first night in the yard, a man approached and introduced himself and tried to shake my hand. I froze and was unable to speak. My partner spoke up and said, "No touching." He backed away and pointed at me and said, "Newbie." Well, if being scared as hell in a desolate wasteland of wandering unknown men in blue meant that I was a newbie, then yes, he would be correct. He went his way and we walked towards the gym. The gym is a large, dark, drafty, dreary, and empty room with the exception of exposed urinals along the side wall. The guards unlocked the gym and the cabinet where the art supplies are kept, and then they left. The prisoners, my students, came in and set up tables and chairs. Before I knew it, I was sitting ever so silently and small in front of 25 men wearing blue staring at me. My partner went about her business of checking in the students, collecting ID cards, and keeping track of everything and everyone. She bustled about with ease, chit-chatting and checking out the supplies. Every pencil and ruler is numbered. Every eraser is accounted for because heaven forbid someone instigates an escape with a 1-inch rubber eraser. I sat there. She checked out my supplies and handed me a numbered pencil and a piece of paper since I was actually supposed to teach the class and I was slated to give a drawing demonstration. She then gave me an incredibly enthusiastic introduction. What she failed to notice was that I was in a catatonic state. After an eternity, and I can say that time in prison is an eternity, I stood up and slowly started rambling and giving away way too much private information about myself. I was getting strange looks from, quite honestly, some scary-looking dudes with impressive facial tattoos. So I picked up speed, and I was speed rambling. I told them about my mother's dog, Reggie, and my love for Tom Brady, and that I drank boxed wine. In an attempt to slow down this train wreck, my partner stepped in and suggested I give the demo. Good idea. I had my paper, but I couldn't quite put my finger on the pencil. Surely it was somewhere in one of my pockets. I had 4 layers of black on: black pants, black shirt, black sweater, black jacket. In front of 25 prisoners, I started feeling myself up and down while still maintaining a constant flood of words. Now they were in shock. And then I saw it right in front of me. One of the guys had his hands cupped on the table. I looked at him and softly chirped, "You have my pencil." He might as well have flipped me off. He smirked and said, "I was holding it for you." So began my first class. A class soon after, I got into the gym without incident, was getting supplies when I noticed a half-naked man in a cage. A man in a cage. Obviously, during my first class, at my heightened state of extreme fear, I failed to notice the 2 telephone booth-sized cages, which I learned were used for men who were not being good prison citizens. They were held in a cage until they were moved, no doubt, to another cage. And the only other time I've seen a live person in the cage was in the 90s in a trendy bar in Greenwich Village. There, 2 smoking hot bikini-clad female go-go dancers were in cages hanging from the ceiling over the bar and gyrating to Baby D's "Let Me Be Your Fantasy." It was sexy as hell. But there was nothing sexy about this man in the cage in the prison. So I went to my supervisor, my partner, and I said, "Hey, there's a scantily dressed man in a cage." She shrugged and said, "Yeah, that happens sometimes." So I quickly weighed my options. Stay in the gym with a naked man in the cage, or go out in the yard alone and wait for the guards to come to take the man away in the cage. The yard was a known entity to me, the man in the cage not so much, so I chose the yard. For weeks and weeks after each class, I drove home in tears. I would weep and weep. I was a mess. Everyone asked, "Hey, how's the job going?" And my standard answer was, "It's daunting on all levels." The fact was, I couldn't wrap my head around any of it. We were not allowed to trust a person with a pencil sharpener. I cried for how we treat human beings. I cried for the crimes they committed. I cried for the victims. I cried for the families. I cried for humanity. My mom kept urging me to quit. Just stop. But I kept showing up. As for their art, there's a wide discrepancy of abilities. Some students had never drawn before, and some were accomplished artists. I encouraged them to really personalize their work. Sometimes this backfired a little bit. One student drew disturbingly over-sexualized drawings of nude women in war zone settings, and he was a little too eager to see my reactions to his creations. He creeped me out, but I kept my game face and I would give him compositional suggestions. I never asked, but yes, most told me their stories. Not surprisingly, the major themes were youth, gangs, drugs, and bad decisions. One particular assignment I gave was to draw the landscape of my life, and this was a heartbreaker. A baby-faced student divided his paper in 2 halves. On the right half, he drew his childhood home, toys in the yard, his dog sitting on the front steps, his 4 family members looking out the window. On the left side, he drew a very small tombstone with only his name on it, sitting alone in a vacant space. When I asked about his drawing, he looked at me in a kind of pleadingly way and said, "I was just in the car. I didn't pull the trigger." I am now at a second prison, Centinela, a 2-hour drive straight down the 8 to scenic Imperial Valley. Shockingly, this prison is more intense than Donovan. Centinela is gang-driven and gang-controlled, and these gangsters are my new level 4 students. People ask me, "Do you feel safe?" At Donovan, yes. Centinela, sort of. Some of these men I would invite over for dinner. All right, maybe not dinner, but I would meet them in a very public space like a crowded Starbucks and have a tea with them. And then there are others, a few, that I would never want to see leave an enclosed space. Inevitably, the students ask me to be their advocate, to help them try to get a new sentence or trial. I say no pretty fast, but I do tell them that I am there to help them become the best artists they can be, so they can have their own voice, to be their own advocate. I've now been teaching at men's correctional facilities for over 2 years. I still weep for all involved, and I still get flustered and lose pencils. Thank you.
That was Prudence Horne, everybody.